Alright, so let's get started. So I've called my talk today Accessing Television, Social Inclusion, People with Disabilities. And what I was sort of intending to do when I started was really focus on the social inclusion aspect of television for people with disabilities. But that probably hasn't really eventuated in the final talk I ended up preparing. It's still there a little bit, but I'm also going to look at some other things. But just to start, let you know what model of disability my work comes from. And this is the social model of disability. And this is basically a different way of thinking about disability where we don't concentrate on the medical side of disability, but instead we look at the social restrictions that are created that prevent people with disabilities from really participating in social life community. So I've got a definition here from Michael Oliver that he put together in 1996. And so when I first heard this definition of disability, it really spoke to me and I think changed my life in a lot of ways. So he says we define impairment as lacking part or all of a limb or having a defective limb, organ or mechanism of the body, and disability as a disadvantage or restriction of activity caused by a contemporary social organisation which takes little or no account of people who have physical impairments and thus excludes them from participation in the mainstream of social activity. Now this is the thing for Oliver. He says physical disability is therefore a particular form of social oppression. So disability is what we put on top of people who have impairments, rather than disability existing within the body. So I've got a great little cartoon I like to show every single group of people I speak to about disability, of person in a wheelchair at the bottom of the stairs and a sign saying everyone's welcome to come in, but obviously this person in the wheelchair can't get up the stairs to get into the space that is apparently welcoming to everyone. And also, on the side here we've got the social model of disability and the medical model explaining, according to both these models, where the problem lies. So a medical model of disability would say the problem lies in this person's inability to walk upstairs. That's why they can't get into the room. So what we should do is cure this person or give her prosthetics. Whereas a social model of disability is saying the stairs are the problem, let's build a ramp so this person can get up in the room and everyone can truly be welcome. So I guess you're probably thinking, well, we generally have a lot of ramps now, this isn't so much of a problem. The other day my friend who uses a wheelchair put this on Facebook. She parked her car in a Wilson parking and she hasn't told me which one. She put this up, she couldn't get a park down the bottom, had to actually go up the very top, gets there and finds that the lift and the stairs are downstairs. So inaccessible for her to actually get out of her car and do whatever she was planning to do that day. So what do I do here at Curtin? Well, I've got a few projects on the go at the moment, some finishing, some just starting. The main one I started in 2013 just as digital television was coming in Australia, and what I was doing in that project was looking at how people with disabilities access television, the way disability is represented on television, and other issues related to reception. So I'll talk about that a bit today. And another project I did in 2015 was accessing video on demand, so looking at how people with disabilities are accessing video on demand, if video on demand actually resulted in a better access environment for people with disabilities to watch TV. And I've also started a couple of new projects where I'm not specifically looking at people with disabilities, but instead I'm looking at people without disabilities and what use they're making of these accessibility features, so things like captions and audio description. So today I'll talk about broadcast TV and video on demand accessibility, and hopefully at the end of the talk I'll be able to talk a bit about innovation at mainstreaming accessibility features and how non-disabled people can make use of these features. So I'll whip through all this stuff, is the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of People with Disabilities came in 2006. It was actually the fastest moving UN convention that's ever been negotiated and ratified. They started talking about it in 2001. By 2006 they had the convention all ready to go and countries started signing onto it. So what the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities does is it tries to present disability access as a human rights issue. So people with disabilities have a human right to access the whole community as people without disabilities do. So what they said, people with disabilities have the right to live independently, participate fully in all aspects of social life, and so people who sign on to the convention, countries have to take the appropriate measures to ensure people with disabilities have access on an equal basis to people without disabilities to all sorts of environments. There are 50 articles, so some of the environments are the physical environment, to transport, to health, education, and information and communication technologies is also big in the UN Convention, as it is in all of our social lives now. So the UN Convention recognises that people with disabilities have a right to access information and communications in the same way they have a right to access roads, transport, buildings, and school, medical facilities, participate in the workforce. So information and communication is being recognised as important as access to things like health and education. So the UN defines communication as so language is displays of text, braille, tactile communication, large print, accessible multimedia, as well as written, audio, plain language, human reader and augmentative and alternative modes and means of communication, including accessible information and communication technology. So I think television should fit into that. So I see the UN as saying people with disabilities have a right to access and participate and watch television just like everyone else does. So how can we make TV more accessible to people with disabilities? There are a number of ways. So this is a list of different accessibility features that some are available on TV and some sort of in a blue sky hypothetical environment could be available through digitisation of television. So audio description is the track of narration, which describes what's happening on screen, usually appears in between bits of dialogue, and this is an access feature for people who are blind or vision impaired. Captions, I'm sure you've all seen captions or subtitles at some point in your TV viewing career by now. So this is the presentation of the audio on television as text on screen. Lip reading avatars. As far as I know, this is not really widespread, but the technology is there and different people are developing lip reading avatars. So to have an animated talking head in the bottom of the talking pads for lip readers, and signing avatars where we've got hands down the bottom of the screen, translating what's happening on screen into sign language. Spoken subtitles, so that's where the subtitles can be read aloud. Of benefit people with vision impairment, but also people learning another language. Clean audio. This is something that people are really getting excited about in my research, and that is because we have an ageing population. So clean audio is where you can, so background audio or music is sort of muted and you just hear the dialogue or the main information on the television screen. So people as they age want this, and also people who are watching TV late at night don't want to wake up the rest of the family but still want to be able to hear the dialogue, getting excited about clean audio. So something that I found in my research and in the literature is that people with hearing impairments are heavy television consumers. And I really like this quote from a blogger about how television has changed in Australia over the last 30 years. He's talking about how 30 years ago there was virtually no captioning in this country, and then as things came out on video, it would take many years for the video to actually be captioned. But then now with DVD, things are captioned at the top point that the DVD is released. Generally, there are some exceptions to that. And then with Netflix, which I'll also talk about throughout this talk, Netflix should have 100% of content captioned as a result of Americans with Disabilities discrimination complaint against them. And so Netflix in Australia, we have pretty much all the captioning here. So we say we're getting thousands of movies. We've come a long way, but there's still a bit to go, and I'll talk about in a minute. And I really like this picture of an example of what captioning is. Someone talking on the phone, are you listening to me? So people who cannot hear can have access to this information. So here's my social inclusion part. Why is television important to people with disabilities? And what we found is people with disabilities often talk about the social side of TV as why it's important. I'll start with the quote from Lauren Henley from Blind Citizens Australia, and she says, TV is really important to her sense of social inclusion. It's not just about wanting to keep up to date with Days of Our Lives. So like the rest of her family and friends, she wants to have a choice about what she watches, have the ability to be informed about what's going on in the world. And Lauren actually lost her sight so she can reflect on what life was like when she was able to watch TV and after. And she said she lost social inclusion when she lost the ability to watch television and then talk about it with her family and friends. And the bottom two quotes are from people who I've interviewed as part of my research. So what they're saying is significance of audio description is about the social aspect of TV rather than television itself. And the second quote was from a man who was talking about, he got to go home and watch TV with his family and his kids. And as part of this story, he was talking to me about how, his kids were getting annoyed with him, watching TV. He wanted to watch something, they wanted to watch something else, and that was an experience he hadn't had before. So that was, really positive form of social inclusion for him. And just in case you are not familiar with what audio description is, I'm going to show you a clip from Daredevil on Netflix. When we practiced this before the audio.
The passenger door is flung open. His fist, face twisted in rage, yanks Anatoly from the car and flings him down. The Russian springs to his feet and punches at Fisk, who doesn't budge. His hands are like hams pounding at Anatoly's head. He yanks him up by the neck and throws him down, the city skyline in the background. Anatoly brings out a blade. He slashes Fisk across his coat sleeve, revealing not skin, but a fibrous material, body armor. Fisk pins him to the side of the SUV and breaks his arm.
You embarrassed me. Embarrassed me in front of her.
Fisk headbutts Anatoly again and again. The beating continues. Wesley sits in the car, hands folded, staring forward. Anatoly, on the ground, crawls toward the safety of the SUV, Fisk walking behind him. He looks up at Wesley, pleading. Wesley gives him a blank glance. Anatoly raises himself into the car as Fisk slugs him again. He lifts Anatoly and lays his head against the door frame. Then repeatedly slams the door on the man's head. Wesley stares, unaffected. Fisk's teeth are gritted with fury as he relentlessly swings the door. Wesley calmly exits on the other side, buttoning his suit jacket. Finally, Anatoly's head is torn off. Seen from beneath the car, a splash of blood and brains on the asphalt. Fisk stares at the blood-splattered reflection in the car window. His eyes flash.
Alright, Alright, so that's audio description. Another thing that's interesting about captions and audio description is that while people are really familiar with what captioning is, they're not, lots and lots of people have never heard of audio description before. And they were developed sort of around the same time. I don't know what's playing now. But in terms of advocacy, while deaf advocates are really concentrating on access to television as a human right and a social right, blind activists instead were concentrating on access to the workforce, which is an important right. But with video on demand coming in, we're seeing blind activists coming together and advocating for access to television in a way that we haven't seen before. So that's audio description, and just this picture here, you can see how you can turn on audio description on Netflix. It's in the language bar, which I think is really pretty cool. So it's being presented as you know, another language and another way to access television. It's really easy to turn on. Down there and off, and they've got, you know, catalogues of audio description available shows. So what about just Australia generally in terms of our accessible television here? Well, I'm going to focus on audio description for most of this discussion now. So in 2010, the government started talking about this, and they suggested that the move to digital and online television, along with industry innovation, would result in more accessibility, like audio description, and a better provision of captioning. So the government, Telstra and Google all came together. This was around a government policy discussion paper. They said, you know, accessibility should be left up to industry innovation. This is not something we need to legislate. Let's see what happens when people innovate. So 2013, a report by the European Union found that accessibility is actually more widely in place on digital online television in countries that do legislate. And so when we did start legislating for captions, we did see more captions becoming available, and the cost of technology fell, so people could afford it, and we now are in a situation where we theoretically have 100% caption content. Audio description, similar story, different story. In 2012, we had the 12-week trial on the ABC. And during that trial, we saw the same situation as what happened with captioning. So people needed particular set-top boxes to access the audio description, and they were saying, well, I'm not going to buy a set-top box to access audio description if it's only going to be on for 12 weeks. So in 2015, Netflix finally came to Australia legally, and it was also at this time that they introduced audio description on their original programming. So people who required audio description started watching Netflix. And then in 2016 we had the trial on ABC iView, another trial of audio description to see, you know, if offering it on iView was a better way to go, and technology had changed anyway since 2012. And in 2017, the government has convened an audio description working group, which I'm on, and we are discussing options to bring in audio description to Australia. And one of our terms of reference is to try and look into not legislating this and look into other options. So the report is apparently going to be finished in December. I don't yet know what it's going to say. So one of the issues back here I said was the Australian standards around the set-top boxes. They can all display captions, but they can't all display audio description. So Australian standards are then an important part of whether accessibility is available to people with disabilities. And again, the captions, yes, audio description, no. Federal government commissioned a survey of lots of different set-top boxes to see which set-top boxes could receive audio description. And what they found was there was no particular standard in terms of these set-top boxes did whatever. You know, they displayed audio description in all kinds of different ways. So we really need to have one standard for displaying this in order to have audio description in this country, is what I think. So we were in a situation where people are saying, yeah, we want audio description and captioning on TV, and industry government saying, well, at the point where we get competition and innovation, that is when we will have better accessibility. So I've done a study of catch-up television services, which I argue would have been affected by the introduction of video on demand, things like Netflix, Stan Presto, etc. And in terms of the display of captions on those. So I first looked into this in 2014 to see which catch-up TV services displayed captions and which didn't. And what I discovered was that ABC and SBS did. They displayed captions. Channel 7 started displaying captions during the process of my research. At the beginning of the research they didn't, at the end they did. But what I found was all the commercial stations were saying, we're working on it, it's in the works or it's in the pipeline, but never really putting a timeline on it. So that was 2014. Then 2015 we have Netflix and all the other video on demands come in, so you think, well, that's competition. Has this had an effect on the provision of captions on our commercial free-to-air catch-up services? And what I found in 2016 is no, it really had no effect because, again, SBS and ABC, they offered captions. Channel 7 did, but still they weren't guaranteeing it on every single episode in a series. And still 9 and 10, no captions. So, just for continuity, I also looked at video on demand. As you can see, in 2014 there was no Netflix, Stan or Presto, and there was captions on quick flicks, but only if they were provided by the studio, and what we found was they were really difficult to figure out how to access them. It wasn't a simple matter of going and seeing the closed caption turning on. It was hard to understand which shows actually had captions there. And again, in 2016, we have the, after the launch of video on demand, Netflix has captions because of that ADA complaint I mentioned at the beginning. QuickFlix still has their few captions that were difficult to identify. Stan, they launched without captions, but then a few months later they introduced captions quietly and didn't really publicise it to the disability community. And my research team we really just found out by accident. We'd done all this research, who has captions, Stan doesn't have captions, and then they bring it in, but just with no kind of message to the people who would need to use it. And difficult to figure out how to use. So Presto, which was the Foxtel video on demand that has since been folded, they had no captions. Foxtel Play, no captions. Easy Flicks, so you can see in this table too all the providers that went broke after Netflix came in. So that was also an interesting aspect of the research. And audio description, are they working on that? I don't know. So in my initial survey of people with disabilities that I did in 2013, about 97% of people with vision impairment who responded to my survey said they watched TV, that watching TV was difficult, and that around 72.5% said they'd really like audio description. And again, I've got a quote from someone I spoke to about why audio description was important. And what's interesting about this quote is she focuses on television, not just on the social aspect of television, but the difficulty of watching television. She talks about watching Power Games, a show that moved between locations and lots of characters, and she said she couldn't tell what was going on screen, snippets of text that she couldn't read, and she said she was watching this show and she didn't even know what country the show was set in at certain times, so she was really missing out there on the experience of television. So here we go back to Netflix. There's a lot of argument that Netflix is the answer to accessibility for people with disabilities, particularly in terms of the availability of audio description. And something we need to remember in this whole discussion is that Netflix is a service you pay for using the internet, and for a lot of people with disabilities, paying for the internet is not always something that they're able to afford. And for elderly people with vision impairment, this is even more so the case, that sometimes a decision has to be made between eating and paying for the internet. So video on demand isn't the answer for everyone who has a vision impairment, but we are getting audio description in this country via video on demand. I won't talk about Netflix's complicated relationship with accessibility. I've kind of alluded to the complaints they've made against them. There have also been different online advocacy groups, for example, the Accessible Netflix Project, who really agitated Netflix for change in terms of their provision of audio description. So my video on demand research in 2015, I've already talked about closed captions, only being on Netflix and Stan, yes on QuickFlix, but no one could figure out how to use it. Audio description was only available on Netflix. So video on demand, who knows if it's always the answer. We also asked people, so we're asking people which on-demand services they were using, and Netflix Australia was the most popular there, we think because of their large catalogue of caption content and being the only place in Australia that actually offered audio description. So Catch-Up TV next. There's not really much to say about that other than Netflix was the most popular. But here we're looking at how are people accessing the video on demand, and the iPad tablet most popular, desktop pretty close. But what surprised us, we're surprised but not really that surprised kind of sense, was the smartphone being as popular as it was in terms of a way to access television. And I suppose if you're just listening to the audio, it doesn't matter that your phone is this small, rather than watching a big TV screen. So the smartphone was pretty popular there. And the question, do you find video on demand more or less accessible? Mainly more, but not significantly more, and sort of all around the same. And people here talking to us about why they liked Netflix so much, and it's just about the availability of captions being given in free-to-air TV, and something coming up in these critiques as well is the portals through which so for example the ABC, how you watch Catch-Up TV on ABC, that site being inaccessible was a problem, and this is something the ABC has been informed about and not fixed in an ongoing capacity. And the fact that people can access lists of programs through the Netflix app that are audio described rather than having to search around, not really sure where to find it. It's useful. Foxtel cops a lot of complaints all throughout the 5 years that I've been researching this. People have had an issue with Foxtel and the idea that, say you require captions and they're not available on Foxtel, you're paying the same amount as someone who doesn't use captions, so you're not paying for the same service in that respect. And something that Foxtel do is, how they advertise Game of Thrones, for example, same time as the US, they don't offer the captions on that first screen. You've got to wait for 7 hours until they repeat before you can get the captions, which I'll talk about a bit later as well. So we, of course, through our video on demand research recommendations, firstly, government, we recommended they needed to think about introducing legislation and working with people with disabilities. And so our recommendation to the video on demand service provider is, recognise people with disabilities as a proportion of your audience who, have families and friends that they might want to watch TV with. So, we said if you can't be bothered making your content accessible for these groups, this huge group, if you think about people with disabilities making up 20% of the population, and then their families and friends who they might want to watch TV with or talk about TV with, it's huge. Yeah, we suggested hire accessibility consultants to make it happen, and for people with disabilities to agitate and not just be silent about this, get involved in advocacy efforts like the Accessible Netflix project or disability discrimination complaints. So what I just want to briefly end on is something that I feel that has been left out of this whole discussion, and that is the notion of innovation and creativity. So we've already seen, and this has been argued before, that broadcasters and video on demand providers aren't valuing people with disabilities as part of their audience members. And most of the focus in this discussion is on the technical problems, so why can't we offer audio description on Australian broadcast television? The reason is because it's too complicated. Australian broadcast television is on all these different time zones, all these different channels and different regional locations, different technologies. So focusing on those technical problems, we're not really looking at innovation around the way captions and audio description can be used by consumers. So I think we all probably broadly recognise the human rights of people with disabilities to access television, but this argument doesn't seem to be working as well as it should be. And so what I want to start looking at going into the future, maybe I can get some of your ideas here now, is the idea of creativity and innovation, and how that can be brought into this discussion, maybe some ideas of how these features can be used. And now I've got a little gift there from Twin Peaks. Who watched the Twin Peaks? Anyone in this room? No one? No one watched it? Okay, well, I'll talk about it. You watched the original series? Okay, good. So something that happened with the return is people were saying, what's going on? I don't really get it. It was really complicated. There were lots and lots of layers. And so when Audrey's return finally happened, I think it was episode 9, which is, nobody had any idea what was going on. And the conversation when she first appeared was around these people called Billy, Tina, Chuck and Paul, and no one knew who they were. So what people did was they went and got the caption track, so looked up the transcripts to see who Billy, Tina, Chuck and Paul were, and try to piece together what Audrey's story actually was, and if Billy, Tina, Chuck and Paul actually made any difference to the ongoing story, which I don't think they did in the end. And so what people discovered was the character Billy was introduced earlier in one of the, I won't go into it if no one's watched it, but there was also a character called Bing, and so there was this big discussion about the transcript closed caption track, was there a mistake in it? Was Audrey talking about Billy? She was talking about Billy, but the caption track earlier was talking about Bing, so people were trying to piece together this story, and they really needed reliable captions to do it, and as far as I can tell, they haven't fully figured it out, and I couldn't figure out what Audrey's story was either. So I'm going to have to go back and watch it all again. So let's briefly look at a case for mainstreaming accessibility features like captions and audio description within education, we find that caption lectures improve comprehension of students. Students are able to go back and search lecture transcripts for keywords. Audio description improves literacy. Captions and audio descriptions together do all sorts of crazy things and really help out certain groups of students, for example, students who have intellectual disabilities. So as I was saying with Twin Peaks, captions offer us an opportunity for transcripts. So we can go back and look into TV shows, or if we're talking about education lectures. There's been some research done around cooking shows and the use of captions in cooking shows and what this could potentially mean for sorts of software that's developed. So when people watch cooking shows, they want to go off and look up the recipe later, because on the cooking show itself, it's not really presented in a recipe form, is it? It's like entertainment. It's more about what happens in the kitchen rather than the recipe that people want to go back and get later. So with captions, that recipe can kind of be cobbled together, and the different parts of the show can be put together, put online, and people can access. But also another thing that could happen is, like for example, MasterChef, they connect with Coles, don't they? Coles or Woolworths, I don't know which one. So you can connect that to the Coles website, and then so this is the commercial aspect that people should be looking into. Order all the food that you need to make this recipe. And as I was saying, Twin Peaks viewers were going back to the caption track to try to figure out exactly what was going on. And the discussion was, well, only David Lynch really knows. But now that we know, he's come out and said, well, actually, it's up to you guys to figure out what was happening. It's, everyone has their own interpretation, own story. Another example is Game of Thrones. Now, early in the research, I discovered people without hearing impairments were watching Game of Thrones with the captions on, so they could figure out exactly what was happening with the complicated character names and locations. So that's another use of Game of Thrones. I also think in terms of multitasking, audio description and audio description in particular is really useful here. So people have never really paid full attention to TV, despite what the criticism of TV is, turning people into idiots who just look at a screen. People never really just sat there and watched TV. And having audio description on allows us to multitask around television, so do other things. Mike always talks about vacuuming with the watching Daredevil with the audio description track on. I don't do it, but Mike does. And there are other uses here. So one group that people were thinking could benefit from audio description is parents of young children, so not getting a chance to sit down and watch TV, but you can still have it on and be doing all your parental things while still being able to follow what's happening. And for binge watchers, again, having audio description on while you're driving to work is another suggestion that's been made. Again, not something I would probably do. And also the thing I think about audio description is it's offering so much more information about what is happening on the screen. So, things you're missing, you can get through the audio description tracks, so different colours of costumes. If you watch Daredevil with the audio description track on, you really do get a lot more information, and it ties together in a way you might have missed out on certain things. So captions, people use them already in gyms, bars, planes, libraries, instead of having sound on. And what we're seeing a lot more of now is on Facebook. And for example, I opened up news.com.au the other day, and an ad for a TV show that was airing last night came on, but the sound didn't start, it just had the captions. So now it's sort of a whole industry has been created about this, around this automatic play feature on Facebook, where videos just started playing and people said, oh my god. So they turn off the sound so it doesn't disrupt people in certain situations. So now we're seeing a lot more of captioning on online videos. And I've talked to people who create these captions and they say they are slightly different to the type of caption that people who are deaf or hearing impaired do need. But we are seeing, I guess, a new industry around and availability around captionings and a normalisation of this feature that it's on all of our Facebook. We see it, they just start. Which leads us to the idea of personalising television, which is something that we're all doing, and people could come up with any sorts of uses for captions and audio description that I haven't thought of yet. Another show that people are really getting quite excited about in terms of audio description is Sense8, which has a lot of quick cuts, different characters. People don't actually really know what's going on. So I've got two titles from these articles here about audio description in Sense8. So people are saying the descriptive narrator is the best part of Sense8, and Netflix audio descriptions make Sense8 easier to follow. So in this way, people who are not vision impaired are using Sense8, using audio description just to make sense of a popular TV show. As part of my work on the audio description working group, Netflix came and gave us a presentation via phone. And they really talked a lot about this Sense8 and how people are using audio description to watch Sense8. And for them, they were reshaping it as, they've got audio description, which is a really important consumer experience, and they're all about making sure their audiences are happy and they'll do whatever they need to do for them. So in that way, audio description, I guess, was completely turned around from being something for a small group as something to make consumers happy. For example, people watching Sense8 who have no idea what's happening, now they can figure it out. So just to wrap things up, I guess people think, do blind people really watch TV? And the answer is yes, they do. Research going back to the 60s shows that blind people do watch TV at least once a day. And through all the audio description trials with the ABC broadcast and on iView, we've got feedback through that people with vision impairment are watching TV and they appreciate and actually find it a better experience to watch TV using audio description. Of course, these groups have a human right to access television, which will allow them participation in society. And some of the feedback from the trials was that people didn't really realise how much they were missing out on by not being able to watch television, and how much we actually talk about TV in our day-to-day lives as a way to connect with people. So people with disabilities make up an important part of the audience, and once you include their family and friends, that audience is really massive. As I'm saying, TV, important for social inclusion, something to talk about. So when we include alternative formats like captions and audio description sort of as a mainstream feature, something that you can turn on that's there as part of the television experience, what I'm calling the default user position changes. So when we think about television now, it's an audio-visual medium. We probably think of the default user as someone with vision and hearing, but when we have these other features, that user position can change. And could this result, my question is, could this result in more social inclusion for people with disabilities and better access to television? And something to think about is convenience for non-disabled people in this argument, and using that as a way to achieve the goal of better social inclusion and access to television for people with disabilities. And something I forgot to say, this is the end of my talk, electric toothbrushes were developed for people with disabilities. Who has an electric toothbrush in this room? There you go. Okay. Thank you.